Hello, everyone, and welcome. As we're having our attendees join, we invite you to drop in the chat where you are joining from, just so we can get a picture of all the various places across Canada that you're joining from. And so you can feel free to enter that down in the chat while we wait for the rest of our attendees to join.
Okay, we've got Calgary so far. Let's go. Burnaby, BC. Wonderful. Calgary, Montreal, Burnaby times two. Stony Creek, Kelowna, Niagara, Napanee, Burnaby. We are all across the country. That's wonderful.
Awesome. For anyone who's just joining, you can join and enter down in the chat where across our country are you joining from today?
For interaction as well, you could tell us what the weather's like. So, where we are here in Mississauga, Ontario, we had a deluge style downpour this morning, and then it's bright and sunny and shining. So, weather's a little bit all over the place, but is it sunny? Is it raining? Is it cold?
I'll share for me here in Montreal, we're still getting that rain that must have hit the Ontario, Southern Ontario, Eastern Ontario rain. So we're continuing to receive it here further east.
We had one person say cloudy with a chance of meatballs. Solid animated movie if you haven't seen it.
Yeah.
10 degrees, says Kelly. That is cold.
Awesome. Well, why don't we get started? Hello, everyone. Welcome. We're so happy to have you join us today. My name is Laura Laniorg, and I am a Mission Canada campus worker at McGill University in Montreal, Quebec. Today, I'm joined by my co-host David Burke, who serves as a Mission Canada worker at Toronto Metropolitan University.
We are so excited for our webinar today. And our goal is that you would understand secularism and its impact on how people think about truth, meaning, and faith. You'll gain practical tools for engaging secular friends with humility, clarity, and genuine care, sharing the hope of Christ in ways that connect with today's culture.
Mhm. Before we dive right in, we want to give you just an idea of how this webinar will flow today. We will be hearing from our speaker shortly, and after his presentation, we will move into a question and answer and response time. And so if you have any questions that come to you at any point during the presentation, you can feel free to press the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen and enter them at any point during the webinar, and we will then address your questions in the Q&A response time. Again, you can press the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen.
I'm now going to invite John Engels, who is our National Coordinator of Serve Campus Network, to introduce our guest speaker. Over to you, John.
Hey, thanks, David. Hey, I am really thrilled to introduce our webinar speaker, our friend, Blair Bonin. Blair comes from the wonderful Cajun culture of South Louisiana, woohoo, and has spent the last 26 years investing in university students across Europe's diverse secular culture. He serves as the coordinator for Students for Christ Europe, a continent-wide network of campus ministries under the umbrella of the Assemblies of God World Missions. Blair stepped into this coordinator role in 2010 after co-pioneering Students for Christ in Belgium for 10 years and raising up national leaders to carry the ministry forward in the French-speaking region. Today, Blair continues to coach and mentor campus leaders across 16 nations in Europe and beyond, strengthening student ministry in a wide range of cultural contexts. He brings a deep well of experience in engaging secularism with the gospel on university campuses. He holds a master's degree in Bible and theology from Southwestern Assemblies of God University and frequently teaches on navigating secularism from a biblical perspective. He and his wife, Dina, live in Namur, Belgium, and are the grateful parents of six children and five grandchildren. Please join me in welcoming Blair. And Blair, the mic is yours, friend.
Well, thank you. Thank you. It's great to be here. Bonjour to everyone from Namur, Belgium. It's great to join you today. And just a little tweak on that number, John, we have now 6 grandchildren. So had one born in late April. So that's been fun. We are I'm delighted to be here today and to speak to you from a subject that is dear to our hearts because we live and work in such a secularized environment, especially in student ministry, both here on the Western Europe region of our continent, but I know you also live and work in similar context. And so without any further ado, I'd just like to go ahead and start today on making disciples among secular peoples. That's what we're going to be talking about. And my friend David, I think, is going to handle the slides for us as we go through. And then I'll just signal you, David, since we are working with a little bit of a different setup today. Making disciples among secular peoples, friends, we are approaching secularism from a couple lenses. One of those lenses is the culture and then the worldview in which we live and work. And so when we start to talk about culture and worldview, we want to be careful not to give so hard and fast definitions, but general categories are always helpful to us at a meta level as we begin looking into what is secularism, what does it entail, and how does it affect those of us who live in this society, not to mention those who we're trying to reach and disciple for Christ. So I would just say right off the bat, a good working definition that we could use today for secularism, just to make it short and concise, is a society or worldview in which religion or God is not at the center of human life. A society or worldview in which religion or God is not at the center of human life. Now, when we talk about worldview, let's go to that next slide, David. And when we look at worldview, we have a couple of different things here we want to hone in on. Worldview is the deep part, as if we were looking at the image of an iceberg. The submerged part of the iceberg would be our worldview, whereas culture is the thing that manifests itself outwardly, things that we see. And so let's just talk around that for a moment. And then I want to get you to help me discover a few of these elements. If we look at worldview, we could call it the inward lens. And if we talk about culture, we could call that the outward expression. So the inward lens and the outward expression. The inward lens is that underlying philosophy or assumption or belief system about human life, reality, morality, and things like this. Belief system is something that might resonate with you when you think about worldview. Whereas culture is more of the tangible thing, the structured way of life that different groups of people, different nations, different cultures, the ways in which they live. If we look at it at scale level, we would say that worldview is more or less held by the individual, whereas culture is inherently corporate. It's not to say that worldview can't be collective as well, but it really boils down to what do I believe in worldview. We could have a collective worldview when we talk about things like the Western worldview, or we might say a biblical worldview. That's a collectivity of things. But at the essence of it all, each person has to decide, do I really believe that system? Whereas inherently corporate is culture. It's group oriented. And then as far as function goes, our worldview would be how we see. It's the lens through which we see and make sense of the world. Whereas culture dictates how you actually live out your life, how you express your beliefs. So that being said, why don't you help me if you can? And I'm not sure if anybody has, do we have the opportunity for people to weigh in with audio or only through the chat, David?
Just through chat.
Just through chat. Okay, so let's do it through chat. So help me out here, friends. What would be some things that would relate to culture? Let's talk about culture first. What are some things that might relate to culture? Just throw that in the chat. Something that is outward showing in a group or in a culture or in a nation. What's some of those things you might see? How we dress, language. Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I'm seeing a few pop up here. Movies. Yeah, for sure. Anything else? Anything else? Somebody want to join in, chat, throw it in the chat and let us know. Okay, so those are some of the things that we do see. Body language, yeah, for sure. Body language is a big one. Hey, Lori, good to see you on this call today. Food, yes. Thank you, Cal. Can always count on Cal. All right, man, great. So those are some of the things that culture expresses. Dress, yes. Thank you, Elvis. Dress as well. Now, if we looked at worldview, that inner part, that belief system, what would be some things that we could label as parts of worldview? Throw that in the chat as you think about it. How we see the world. What would be some things that, ways of knowing and being? Yeah, belief in God, for sure. Values, very good, Trevor, thank you. Good answers, great answers, guys. For the sake of time, David, let's go ahead and pull up that next slide where we can see a whole plethora there of things. Good versus evil, yeah. So language, dress, celebrations, food, folklore, arts, these are some cultural aspects, how our culture expresses itself. And then our systems below that culture, body language, man, y'all really hit on a majority of these, I think. Work ethic, beauty ideals, personal space, gender roles, humor, values, beliefs. So you get to see a little bit the difference now between culture and worldview. One is more the inner, individual, how do I make sense about the world in which I live? And then the outward expression through culture. If we leave that and we talk about, or we keep that in mind, I should say, if we keep culture and worldview in mind, and we move towards this secularism identity, let me just back up one moment and say worldview matters because it shapes the language that we use to present the gospel. Worldview matters because it shapes how we talk and how we present the gospel. And in the society in which we live now, we might have to shift and adjust that manner in which we speak, that manner in which we present the gospel. Secularism, as I mentioned before, is kind of a way of seeing the world in which religion or God is not at the fore. And it's also the framework, friends, by which people understand their own lives. Secularism has become that. And most people, they wouldn't label themselves as secularists. Go ahead and put up that next slide, David, if you will. Most people wouldn't label themselves as secularists, but this creates challenges in identifying, studying, and creating strategies to reach secular people. And even though most people won't say I'm a secularist, some will, but most people won't, secularism actually acts like a religion. It may not be a world religion, but it acts like a religion because secularism at its core is an orientation of the heart. It attempts to answer the same big questions, the same worldview questions that any world religion might attempt to answer. What's real? What's good? What's evil? Who am I? What's beyond this life? Can I really know someone outside of humanity, something outside of humanity, outside of what I can see and touch and feel? So in that sense, secularism actually acts like a religion. When we think of secular society, you can go into the next slide, David, thank you. When we think of the secular society, we think of a different world than your parents or your grandparents grew up in. The world has changed. A lot of us here on this call are working with university students. Universities have changed. Universities used to be purely about the pursuit of truth. And then we're going to get into, well, what is truth? Values and worldview are forged by the culture or the society in which we live. So let me ask you a question. Who are the new parents in today's society? Throw your answer in the chat there. Who are the new parents of today's society? What would you say? Teachers, professors, an iPad, phones, influencers, celebrities. Wow, bingo, bingo, politicians. Yes, yes, yes. So several of you hit on media. Oh, somebody just said it, media. I would submit to you that media and advertising are the new parents of today's society. As you can see, we've had a massive shift in culture. Since the 1960s, major driver of culture has been media. It has exposed people to stories, to images, to ideas, to possibilities. The world has become so much smaller. The tree of knowledge and its forbidden fruit has grown to be the largest tree in the garden, and there's plenty for everybody to eat. While biblical texts, deeper truths in life seem to be maybe gathering dust. We have an ancient book versus high resolution interactive images. Seems hard to compete with in many ways. Consumerism is king. There's no questioning of ethics, of impact, which is the heart of discipleship when we really think about it. Ethics, honesty. Just yesterday, I was in Brussels and I was renewing my passport at the US Embassy, and my wife and I, we went to get a bite to eat after. And as we were eating, we went through the line at this self-serve place and got our food, paid at the register, went and sat down to eat. I looked at my ticket and I noticed that I had paid for almost everything on my platter except for the dessert. So my little slice of chocolate cake was not on my ticket. I went back to the register and I just happened to see the manager and I said, hey, I didn't get charged for this dessert. And he looked at me like I was from Mars. He was like, what do you mean? I'm like, well, I have a piece of chocolate cake, but I didn't get charged for it. And he said, and you came back to tell me? And I'm like, well, yes, sir, I did, because it would be dishonest if I would take it and not pay for it. So I need you to ring it up for me. And he was just totally flabbergasted that someone would come back and not just say, oh, well, too bad for them. They missed it. I get a free dessert, Massive shift in culture. This is a part of the secular world in which we live. Even Christians, friends, even Christians tend to share the same appetite and feed on the same things. And so we run a danger of becoming indistinguishable with the rest of society. But even with all of this change, all of this shift in society, there are some things that remain unchangeable. Values and worldview are still mainly determined by people from 18 to 25 years old. That's where the worldview is solidified. What's something else that has remained unchanged? Well, we still have a timeless gospel. Great news, good news for every person in this world. And we have a mandate that hasn't changed, a mandate to follow Christ and to make disciples who will make disciples, who will in turn make disciples. So cultural norms have changed. There's a massive shift in society. Even a generation ago, things immoral, considered immoral or inappropriate, are now common and acceptable. The moral conscience is squashed by the plurality of morals that are pushed by the media. And so secularism then becomes a commitment, an orientation of the heart where God or gods are no longer at the center. And if we go to the next slide, we'll see who or what is at the center now. It's the project self. Self displaces the higher authority, the higher power, the moral authority has been displaced by the self. Now, we just have a few of those things listed under that highest authority, like life, food. It could be education. It could be work. It could be family. It could be a bunch of different things. But just suffice it to say that self has moved from the bottom to the top. That societal shift where no longer many people no longer have even a reference point for certain things about religion, about God. For instance, I live in a Catholic nation, predominantly Catholic nation by culture and by religion. And I remember when I first arrived to Belgium many years ago, I was talking to a young guy on the street and we were talking about what we were doing. And at that point, I was basically operating as a youth pastor in a local church. And I used the term youth pastor, and he had no idea what that was. He asked me if it was a Boy Scout leader. And I said, well, let's start from there. Let's start from Boy Scout leader and move it to the domain of faith and, working with students and youth. But just this idea that there's no longer any reference point in a secular society. In fact, let's think about some of the characteristics of a secular worldview. Because secularism does provide a framework for living and for making decisions, for choosing bad over good or good over bad, and for relating to others. And secular people see the self as the only plausible option for organizing and making sense of their lives. So what are characteristics? Well, here's one. We just mentioned it, the self project. The goal of life is to create the true self, which is a fluid, kind of never-ending process of trying to find happiness and meaning. That project self, it's not going to be necessarily set in stone. It's going to shift, it's going to move, it's going to be fluid with circumstances, situations, relationships. So that's one characteristic of a secular worldview. A second one is that truth is defined by the individual and determined by the context. So the idea of an authoritative, universal, or moral absolute is gone by the wayside now. And we have this thing called your truth, my truth. And so we might be discussing truth or faith with someone, and somebody might say to you, yeah, but that's your truth. I have my own truth. And so this nebulosity, that's this hard to latch on to kind of characteristic that is fluid. It changes from context to context. It may be that you believe one thing and I believe one thing, another thing, but that's your truth and that's my truth. And there's no longer a whole lot of talk about the truth, the truth. So that's a second characteristic. A third characteristic would be do no harm. The general acceptance that not harming others, the earth, animals, and things of this nature is what constitutes good. Now, these are good things. And I would submit that Christians actually do these things too. But it's almost as if this becomes the essence of good. And Jesus told us that none is good, only the Father is good. And so, but this is one characteristic, a third characteristic of a secularist would be do no harm. But that might change with the context because truth is fluid and the context dictates. A fourth characteristic would be experiential. Transcendence through powerful experiences, life experiences, collective or individual. Might be something like extreme sports, deep immersion in nature, music of various genres, yoga, meditation, technology, sexuality, experiential life. This is a fourth characteristic. And then a fifth characteristic of a secularist, kind of to round it out, would be sexual freedom. Above all else, I get to do what I want to do with my body and with whomever else I want to do it. And nobody can dictate to me any differently. That's part of Project Self. Sexual freedom above all else. So maybe this kind of helps you kind of shape a little bit in your minds what secularism is, maybe a working definition, some of the characteristics of it. And with that in mind, I'd like to jump right into 4 types of secularists. David, thank you. 4 types of secularists. Because secularism, as we find it on the street, it mixes both formal forces of secularism, like philosophical thinking and historical thinking, with on-the-ground realities of postmodernity. And so it's kind of a mélange, a mixture of things. But generally speaking, we can pretty much find that our friends that are secular, with whom we've developed relationship, we're walking a journey together, normally will fall into one of these 4 categories, or they'll bleed over into a couple of these categories. Radical. This would be a radical secularist would be somebody like Dawkins or Hitchens. Vocal. Radical secularists are vocal. They're visible in the press. They deny anything other than the material existence. And radical secularists often have their ideas trickling down. They have a trickle-down influence into the larger culture. However, I would say, and a lot of other people I know would say, that radical secularists are sometimes most moved by the radical Christian love that they find in a true believer and that they find in reading the scriptures, especially the person and message of Jesus. So that's one tack that we can take when we're interfacing with radical people, radical secularists. Let's talk about the radical Christian love of Christ. They often admit to Christianity also being one of the most plausible of world religions. And they also recognize that they are benefiting from a comfortable and a peaceful life as a benefit of the influence of Christianity in their society, especially here in the West. I'd just like to plug a book right now. I don't think it's on my book list at the end, but There's a book that's called The Book That Made Your World by Vishal Mangalwadi. He's a Christian Indian philosopher and theologian. And this would give you a very good insight into the powerful way in which Christianity has shaped the West. The Book That Made Your World. Just want to plug that right there. Also want to say that all of this teaching that I'm doing, I don't remember if I said this at the beginning, but I want to say it now. I want to give credit to where credit is due. Many of my colleagues in AGWM World Missions here in Europe have pioneered much of this material, and I'm just standing on their shoulders. I'm teaching a lot of their own material. They're the ones that deserve the kudos and the credit for it. So I just get to be a part of the team, and I'm just happy about that. So we have radical secularists. Then we have moderate or traditional secularists. These secularists would be committed to a religious identity. Might be Catholic, they might be Lutheran, they might be Muslim, but they're definitely committed to a religious identity. They would be traditional in that sense. They might not be practicing, but for whom culture and religion are inseparable. So many times when we talk about our Muslim friends, we know that their culture and their religion are mainly inseparable parts of who they are. That can be true also in my country, Belgium. When I ask people just in conversation generally, if they're a Christian, they will often say, oh yes, oui, je suis chrétien, je suis catholique. Yes, I'm a Christian, I'm Catholic. It goes together. It's an automatic thing. They don't divide from it. It's part of their culture, their religion. It's who they are. But that doesn't mean they're practicing. And often they'll say, oui, je suis chrétien, non, je suis chrétien catholique, mais non pratiquant. So yes, I'm a Christian, I'm a Catholic, but I'm a non-practicing one. And so there we see that there's usually a cultural conservatism sitting on top of a secular worldview. And this happened when I was just recently in Morocco visiting my kids, and my in-drive driver was something like Uber, Abderrahim. Abderrahim took me around the city, and I was looking for something to purchase. And so we spent about 2 hours together, and I found out that it was Ramadan time. It was the month of Ramadan. And so we talked a little bit about that. And I asked Abderrahim if he was practicing Ramadan. He said, yes, of course. I'm Muslim, good Muslim. I'm practicing Ramadan, and don't eat throughout the day. Only eat when the sun goes down. And I said, oh, okay, wow, that's interesting. And so I said, you're 100% on with Ramadan, and you're 100% practicing as a Muslim? Yes, of course. And I said, so do you practice faithfully all the tenets of Islam? And then he says, well, and then he's kind of going on and saying, not this, maybe sometimes not that. And so I saw right away that Abderrahim was a traditional secularist. He has a cultural conservatism sitting on top of a secular worldview. And if I have the time, I'll get back to Abderrahim in another example later on to bring it full circle. Another category of secularist would be a pragmatic secularist. Here in pragmatic secularism, we have, let me just do something here on the computer that I'm borrowing, okay? We have a residual theism. Okay, there's a higher power. It's up there somewhere. I don't know what it is. Maybe it's God, maybe it's not God. Agnostics would fall into this category. But we're still living, if we're a pragmatic secularist, we're still living as if there is no God. Religious labels, that's all passé. If God does it does exist, well, he doesn't bother me and I don't bother him. There's no real room for God or the supernatural, for instance, in a pragmatic secularist life. And then finally, the fourth category is a spiritual secularist. A spiritual secularist would be someone who would say, often I get this, I'm spiritual, but not religious. I'm spiritual, but I'm not religious. And they use different spiritual types to kind of build their own creed, even sometimes. I picked up a hitchhiker one time on the way to a Students for Christ meeting, and we got to talking about faith, and he was saying, well, yeah, I like this from Buddha. I like this from Jesus. I like this from Muhammad. You know, I just kind of put it all together and make my own way. So he was definitely a spiritual secularist. He was making his own creed, but these spiritual beliefs don't necessarily dominate their lives. They don't necessarily guide their behavior or give them a cause that is greater than themselves to live for. They're dabblers. They're dabblers in meditation and astrology and spiritual and esoteric experiences. They're repulsed by the idea that spirituality could only be found in organized religion, and any particular religion at that. The self is still the moral decider and the purpose creator. In fact, that reminds me of, I was listening to a clip by the British historian Tom Holland just this last week. And Tom Holland was saying this. He was saying the common currency of Christianity that we've had for centuries in the West, that common currency is fading. And as a consequence, the muscle memory of values that derive from those stories begins to fade as well. So that muscle memory in our society that was passed on from generation to generation to generation is fading with secularism. He gave an example. He said, the dignity of human beings derives from the book of Genesis, the story of Genesis at creation, the story of humans being created in God's image. But if one is cut off from the framing of this belief system, then the value of humans is therefore not that important after all. Then we get into things like the advent of AI, genetic engineering, transhumanism, and the like. A repudiation of humans having an elevated role in creation is fading. And so Christian assumptions of the West are a legacy that has been handed down for centuries, but are now quite out of sight, out of mind. There's no longer a reference point. But he did say that the hope he has is that the realization of that loss might get people to a path of also realizing that Western values that we have are not inherent. They're not a given. And so then people might start to inquire again as to the origins of these ideas, leading them back to Christianity. Secularism, the 4 types of secularism. When Tom Holland talks about fading from our memory these values, it reminded me of English idioms that, that come from the Bible. We have tons of English idioms that come from the Bible, idiomatic phrases that can be broken down from their origin and their context as being biblical. And yet, when the essence of Christianity fades from the collective memory, then these become phrases that people don't know what they mean anymore. Things like this, the writing on the wall. If you ask any college student today, what's the origin of the writing on the wall, this phrase, this idiom in English? Could they tell you that it comes from the book of Daniel, when there was this hand writing on the wall and the king was going to be judged and Daniel had to interpret the writing? Am I my brother's keeper? Would people know what that reference is? And yet we might use it in everyday conversation. There's nothing new under the sun. Or maybe in the New Testament, we get the blind leading the blind. Cast your pearls before swine. A wolf in sheep's clothing. Go the extra mile. These are phrases that come from the Bible. These are phrases that come from the Sermon on the Mount, from Jesus's teaching. And yet, could our secularist friends know the origin of these phrases? That would be a good thing to do on campus, I would think. Do some kind of a survey or something on campus with students, and just talk about these English idiomatic phrases, where they come from, and can you point to where it would its origin would be? And then that opens up, a whole discussion about faith or the Bible or the message and person of Jesus. Just an idea that I want to throw out there for you, if that would work for your context. So ensconced, back to our secularists, ensconced between the radicals and the moderates is an ever-growing number of secularists that even in Muslims, even in our Muslim friends, even in our Hindu friends, worldviews and practices, those need to be better understood, and so that we can effectively reach them for Christ. Let's go into the next thing now as we kind of turn the page. Within each meta group that we have here, each big category, we can learn and grow in our skills at dialoguing with people. I'm convinced that that's something we can grow in. And Jesus taught in this way. And just as each person rejects Jesus for a different reason, various reasons, people also accept Jesus for different reasons. Some people might be looking for a truth encounter. Some people might be wanting to know the plausibility of belief in Christ. What is the plausibility? What is the truth encounter in that? What is the love encounter? What is the desirability of the Christian message? Is it attractive? Is it plausible? Is it believable? Is it desirable? Is it attractive? And thirdly, is it authentic? Is it tangible? Can I wrap my mind around it? Can I build my life around it? So these are some ideas that secularists will deal with. Is it believable? Is it attractive? Is it authentic? The plausibility, the desirability, and the tangibility of the gospel. As we move on, let's go to the next slide, David. As we move on, let's talk about 3 areas of basic human need. 3 areas of basic human need. And somebody keep the time for me. David, will you keep the time for me and give me a heads up when I have like 5 minutes left? That'd be okay? Thank you, man. Appreciate it. 3 areas of basic human need. We're made in the image of God. Media has attacked what God values most, his image, and media has discipled a culture and undermined the 3 basic needs of humanity. We have those 3 basic needs shown on this slide: security, significance, and self-worth. What would be the world's answer or offer to the following needs? If we're talking about security, I'd like to submit to you that the world's answer to security is often, and this is on the next slide, is often fear. This might seem like it's the opposite of what security is about, but it still deals very deeply with what security is. An increased sense of fear from all the dreadful images we see nonstop, 24/7, has resulted in hearts being penetrated, both in quantity and in detail. And those hearts penetrated by the plethora of images so readily available to us attacks one of the main human needs of security, and it creates fear. And so that's why we have a society that feeds on fear, We have media, even journalism, that will feed on fear. We have a whole generation of students who have no hope for tomorrow because there's a sense of despair that surrounds them. Their sense of security has been eroded from under them. And so I submit to you that the opposite of security is a fear factor that plays into people's hearts and minds. Secondly, on the next slide, we treat significance. What does the world offer? Instead of significance, it offers fame, the celebration of celebrity, rather than a person's contribution to society, has distorted the view of human significance and led to a desire to be appreciated by thousands of strangers. It's uncanny how many people I meet now, and young people, even preteens. What is it like you'd like to be when you grow up? Or what would you like to study? Or what kind of job would you like to have when you grow up or when you're older in life? Oh, easy. I want to be an influencer. I want to be an influencer. This is a major thing for many, many young people today because of what they've seen in media and because of the power of media. They would be willing to trade significance for fame. This is all part of the secularist worldview. Then the third part, the third human need, I should say, is self-worth. If we can go to that next slide. What does the world offer in exchange for self-worth? Well, it offers comparison. The promotion of self-hatred through comparison in advertising. Something like this. It goes something like this. You won't be happy, you won't be complete, you won't be loved until you have this, experience that, or look like him or her. This is the comparison factor. This taps into self-worth, to identity. And these three areas are the currency of secular culture and the root, I would say, of most discipleship issues. Those of you who are working with students would probably say the same thing. The root of discipleship issues are usually security, significance, and self-worth. And that leads us to what does discipleship in the digital age look like? Discipleship in the digital age. You can go to the next slide. I actually already glossed over that or mentioned it. In discipleship of culture from a kingdom perspective, what do we do then? We counter fear with freedom. We counter fame with deep, true love. We counter comparison with contentment. We bring kingdom perspective to these parts of secular culture. Jesus said something in John 17, verses 15 and 16, and I'm going to just read that. John 17, 15 and 16, Jesus said, "My prayer is not that you take them out of the world, but that you protect them from the evil one. They are not of the world, even as I am not of it. Sanctify them by the truth. Your word is truth." So we need to see like God sees. And when we see like God sees, then we can bring these perspectives of freedom, love, and contentment to our secular friends. We can counter fear with that freedom that Christ brings. We can counter fame and talk about, well, what does real love look like? And we can counter comparison by highlighting contentment and gratitude. So give your generation a new diet, I say. A values-based, not image-based diet. And that new diet is on our next slide. We want to move to mountaintop discipleship. We go on a high pilgrimage. We take students and others that we're in relationship with to a high pilgrimage, and we help them to see the global and historical context of the faith that we purport. We want to engender gratitude for those who have gone before us. We want to point to what made the West, what built the West, what were some of the foundational principles. Then we want to move from mountaintop discipleship, or not move from it, just another aspect of discipleship would be face-to-face discipleship. We're created to know and be known at deep levels. So we want to foster honest, open, vulnerable discipleship, one with another. This points to significance. The first one points to security. The second one points to significance. And then the third one, physical discipleship, points to self-worth, where we want to invite our friends to cut screen time, take students, take friends, take neighbors away from screens, away from media, away from demands on time, to be alone with God, with others, retreats, weekends away, where we can really delve deep into who we are and what we are all about, and what is our cause that is greater than ourselves. Now, I think we're knocking on, how's my time, David? I have 5 left?
5 minutes.
Right. 5 minutes left. Okay. So as usual, I will not get through all of my notes today, all of my slides today, but I will leave them with you. And at the end, I do have some resources that I've listed there, a couple books that I've listed. But let's see, what I'd like to do is go to, David, if you would help me, if you would go to slide 26, we want to look at cultural narrative clues. Slide 26, cultural narrative clues. And here's just a little bit more practical things. When we're dealing with people who are outside of our framework, outside of our faith tradition, there's some things that are often confusing to our friends. So we want to help explain things that are confusing. In fact, we want to, sometimes we'll use some Christianese words that people just don't understand, because that collective memory of the West is fading, and they have no longer a reference point to even say the word salvation. You know, what does that even mean? You know, and so we want to help define when we discuss with people, especially people from outside of our faith tradition. We want to help define what things mean, that things that might be confusing. Also, within our dialogue with people, we might get a narrative connection. There's going to be some things that resonate, and we want to capitalize on things that resonate. For instance, let me get back to Abderrahim. I was in Abderrahim's car, and we drove up to a red light. And okay, in Morocco, there's not just 2 lanes. It's just everybody just comes together, and you maneuver and fight your way through the maze, and you just try to figure out how to get to the head of the line. And so Abderrahim's, his English was and his French was and my Arabic was nul. So we kind of went with French and English, and he maneuvered his car, and he wiggled it in between a couple of cars. We had already talked a little bit about faith, and he wiggled it in between a couple of cars to get right at the red light when it would turn green. And then he goes, like a serpent. And all of a sudden, that was my clue right there, like a serpent. Well, we both have this idea of a serpent in our cultural and our religious traditions. So I said, you're right. You wiggled in there like a serpent, kind of like the serpent in the Garden of Eden when he wiggled in and he convinced Adam and Eve to go against God. And he's like, yeah, you're right, because we share that story. That resonated with him. But then I took that forward and I said, and that's how Jesus came to the picture. And then I went into the gospel about how Jesus crushed the head of the serpent, and how Jesus is the main figure in salvation and bringing us life to God and bringing us back and all kinds of stuff like that. But I made that connection with him first, something that resonated. And then I was able to move into the gospel. Verbal disconnect. Sometimes there's things that offend unnecessarily because of miscommunication. So we want to be careful in how we communicate. Other times there's idols, things that offend because they are understood. When we talk about sin, the sin nature, sometimes people want to think they're good and not sinful at the core. And that's an idol that offends because they do understand. And we walk through that gently and carefully and lovingly with our friends. And then we get to commitment, and that the things that happen at transition and crisis are when commitment moments are abound, I would say. Transition and crisis often provide opportunities to call people to commitment. I think my time's just about over, but if we go to the next slide, I just want to leave you with this. The goal is to listen well, identify underlying assumptions, and connect objections to the gospel with humility. We affirm the concern, name it if it's valid. If there's a concern, we affirm it. I can see how you see that. I can see how you believe that. We diffuse the airtightness of a defeater belief by asking questions instead of making forward statements or hard statements. Ask questions, show assumptions, and then we offer Christ. How Christianity addresses the concern may be better, in a better way than what is already believed. Okay, friends, thank you for your time today. I'm going to let you do the question and answer session as you will. And sorry I couldn't get to everything, but maybe it's for another time. But feel free to use the PowerPoint for your purposes in your ministries. Thanks so
Wonderful.
much.
Thank you so much for sharing, Blair. That was absolutely incredible. Just sponging up every little bit of what you were teaching us. So we're now going to move into our Q&R time. There's a little button at the bottom of your screen, depending on your device. It says Q&A. You can submit your questions there. And so we would love for you to do that. Interact as much as you possibly can. So if you haven't had a chance to submit your questions, please do so now. And in the meantime, I'm going to hand it over to Laura to start us off with an introductory question.
Yes, Blair, you serve in a Francophone context, much like I do here in Montreal within Canada. If you can just share what similarities you find between your Francophone European context versus what you've observed here in the Francophone Canadian context, and how do you see the secularism trend affecting the rest of Canada, as we have many participants today who are from an Anglophone Canadian context?
Thanks, Laura, for that question. Yes, my context is French, like yours. So automatically, we'll be coming from a secularist mindset, but with a traditional Catholic background as the predominant religion. And so most of the people that we will interact with will come from that faith tradition. But many of them, at least in my context, and I would venture to say it's the same in yours, where young people of today, I'm dealing with college students, so college students of today would have no reference point to the gospel. Some of the things I mentioned earlier, they would have no reference point to the gospel. They might have a little bit of reference point to the Catholic Church, but that just means that it's cultural for them. In fact, so much so that people, they don't go to church normally, but they'll still, when they get married and have a child, they'll still baptize their child in the Catholic Church because that's what you do. You're culturally Catholic, So all of that is influencing the Catholic faith. the secularism behind it. It's a secular worldview sitting on top of a conservative kind of foundation. But I think that this is true not only in the Catholic world that we live in, but also in the Protestant world. We see the same things. We see in the Anglophone world, we see the same things. I think it's this displacement of Christianity or a morality, a foundation of morality. It's this displacement of it for putting the self on the throne. And yeah, I think that all of our conversations, even our Muslim background friends, we're gonna hit the same kinds of issues with secularism. So I hope that answers the question a bit.
It's wonderful. So, as you were talking, I was thinking about certain laws that have come into play in Canada around secularism and specific religious practices being outlawed in public, depending on the way that you read certain bills. And so I'm curious, pertaining to laws or bylaws, kind of trying to push religion aside, would you say that that is directed towards Islam or towards Christianity or just towards religion in general? Like, is there some sort of ulterior motive? Is there an intended target? Understanding it affects all religions, but do you see there as being a focus? If that makes sense.
Yeah, it does. It does. And I think we were living in a world now in which the general target is it's to provide a secular environment. I mean, France, for instance, France is noted for its laïcité, for its secularism. And so the basis of society is to provide a secular society that would not give, say, favor to one religion over the other, even if one religion was the founding or maybe the foundational principles of that religion were what that society was founded on. So secularism is displacing religion and it's acting like a religion. Now, at first glance, it might look like, in the West anyway, it might look like that it's targeting Christianity. However, I would say that yes, in some ways it's targeting Christianity and it's going to pull up, things that Christendom did very poorly in the West when Christendom ruled and when the state and the church were basically in bed together. So it's going to target Christianity in that way, but at the same time, secularism knows that other world faith religions like Islam would also manifest in society in some very strong ways that would be anti-secular. And that's why sometimes when the people go against the government or certain laws, sometimes we find Muslims and Christians joining together to face a certain thing that the government is, quote, trying to shove down our throats. At other times, it's an indirect target. I'll give you a perfect example here. In Belgium, the government did away with religious worker visas in 2019. So all of our global workers that came to Belgium to serve in a religious capacity no longer can get a religious work visa. And then we were like, we were like, well, why? What's going on? What's happening behind the scenes? Well, behind the scenes, we had imams who were getting the same religious work visas. And some imams, not all, but some imams were radicalizing Muslim youth, which in turn created terrorist attacks. So the government said, okay, well, if it's going to be like that, we'll just wipe it all clean. No religious worker visas for anybody. Christian, Muslim, or other. So it wasn't a direct target to Christianity. It wasn't a direct, it was kind of a direct target, but under the cover at Islam in one way. But it's a way where the secular government, the secular society can kind of code it over and say, no, we just feel like we need to go, because none of that was said in the press, you know. I hope that answers the question.
Yes. We have a question from one of our attendees. And so for the rest of our attendees, if you have questions, feel free to put them in so we can get to it before our time runs out. But from one of our attendees, they said, deconstruction seems to be a symptom of secularism, for better or for worse. How would you walk with a student or young person who says that they're deconstructing from Christianity? And what role does deconstruction play in the faith, if it does at all?
That's a great question. Excellent question. Deconstructionism is high on the ticket right now in a lot of our areas in which we work. And I would say that people, most people, almost everybody, I have 6 kids, all 6 of our kids went through some point in their lives where they were questioning what they believed, because they grew up in a Christian home, in a Christian family, in a ministry family at that. And so they all came to a point where they were questioning their faith. When it comes to deconstructing, I would say it's not necessarily bad to question your faith, but to throw the whole thing out, baby and bathwater together, I would say is kind of a radical attempt to make sense of something, of angst that's happening within. And so what I like to do when I walk with people who are deconstructing is to say, hey, it's all right to question. The thing about it is let's review, okay, who is God? What is the nature of God? What is his purpose in the world? And how does that relate to you? What does that, how do you fit into that? So I would say deconstructing it's a big word. It can mean a lot of things for different people. Some people go all out and just completely jettison their faith. Others wrestle with it and come back stronger. I would say we as Christians, we want to walk with people so that people trust us. They become curious. They're open to change. And they're entering the kingdom as a result of seeking after God and that change, whether that's in a deconstructionist mindset or not.
That's really helpful. Well, we're going to give you one last question, Blair, for the sake of time. Okay. So our final question is, do you see some opportunities that secularism might give us versus the negative outcomes?
Wow. Yeah, well, secularism brings everything into question. So it helps us to wrestle with the big questions of life that many times people are asking, young people are asking, who am I? What do I believe? It wants to create a level playing field, so to speak. I'm not sure it actually does that in the end, but it purports to do that. And I think we can approach secularism from a stand of, hey, all right, you're a secularist, but I want to challenge you. I want to submit to you that secularism is as much a religion, is as much as an orientation of the heart as any of the world religions. And let's talk about what that means for you and yourself and your heart and your life. So, I mean, that's how I would respond to that. And I think, yes, it offers some opportunities, but we have to be okay to live in a nebulous zone sometimes, and to live in an uneasy kind of dialogue with someone. Might be up and down, might be a roller coaster ride in our friendship or in our relationship a bit. But I think if we hold to it, if we're steady and we're we're really showing what a Christian is supposed to be like, then I think in the end, secularism won't be a problem for us in that way.
Blair, thank you so much for joining us today, for sharing your wisdom about secularism, for taking time to answer our questions. We are so thankful that you were able to join us. And despite the troubles that may have led up to this, we're so thankful to have you join us here today. To close our time together, I'm going to invite our Missions Canada Director, Brian Eggert, to pray for us today. Brian, off to you.
Okay, well, thanks, Blair. Appreciate your time today. What a great presentation. Just appreciate you and Dina and the work that you're doing with Students for Christ in Belgium. We're thrilled too that we have the opportunity to impact students and people that are engaging right at the ground level here in Canada as well. So let me pray together for our time, that the Lord would just help us. I was taking feverish notes today, Blair. So we want to pray today. So Lord, together we thank you for our time together today. Lord, you have called us to lead in times that we're in right now. You've called us to be equipped to be like the men of Issachar that would know their time and know their God. And so I just pray, Father, that you would lead us, guide us. Thank you, Lord, for the equipping today. Thank you for the sharpening of our tools, Lord, as it were, to understand engaging people from the secular worldview. And so we pray, Father, that you would continue to give us your wisdom and guidance. Thank you, Lord, that we can listen well in these days. And Lord, we can connect to people with maybe some of the things that they object to the gospel. So we just pray, go ahead of us. Would you just build a hedge just around Blair and Dina today, their ministry there in Europe? Thank you for them, the gift they are to us. And we just pray, Father, that you would just go ahead of them and encourage them today. We ask this in Jesus' name, Lord. Amen.
Amen. Thank you, everyone, so much. Have a wonderful day. Blair, thank you so much. And
Thank
we'll
you,
see you all
guys.
soon.
I really enjoyed it. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Wonderful. Have a great day, guys.